Satellite dishes are supposedly banned in Syria. Officially, the heavily censored state TV is the only source of TV news. The authorities are quietly accepting the fact that most Syrians ignore the satellite ban. On the streets of Damascus, it is the unofficial satellite stations that are favoured for news.
جزيرة
أبو ظبي والجزيرة إن شاء الله.
جزيرة
الجزيرة
السورية.
MBC والجزيرة وأبو ظبي.
Most Syrians ignore state television. They choose selected news channels from other Arab countries, and Al Jazeera is by far the most popular source of TV news, produced in Qatar on the Arab Peninsula. The war in Afghanistan has given Al Jazeera a breakthrough similar to the one CNN got during the Gulf War 11 years ago.
Al Jazeera is more open, you know. They're faster with the news.
It seems to be the most unbiased of all of them. And it really does give you a very good collection of all that's going on, not just a specific point of view.
It doesn't take sides with any of the factions. It analyses all the news and reports from different angles.
Outside the Museum for Military History in Damascus, we see the ruins of an Israeli Phantom plane shot down many years ago. But most of the artefacts are old Soviet MiG fighter planes and space probes, all dating back to the Cold War, when President Bashar al Assad's socialist dictatorship was an ally of the Soviet Union. But times have changed. The Soviet Union collapsed a decade ago. President Assad died in the summer of 2000. Before his death, he had made sure that his son Bashar would inherit the country. The repressed people of Syria would have no say. However, Bashar, who is a qualified doctor, has been working hard since he came to power to modernise and reform the country he inherited. He wants to make Syria part of the new global economy. Allowing his people uncensored news channels is only part of the transition on the growing tide of liberalisation. Saeed Nahas is a leading businessman in Syria.
Nowadays you can see Syria is different. Before, Syria were completely absent abroad in the international events, and especially in the international economic events, Syria were completely absent. Nowadays you find Syria present.
But do you think Syria, within a reasonable time, will be able to adapt to this new modern world?
Of course, we have to. It is not our choice to yes or no. We have to be in the train and we have to develop the things.
But the long road to greater liberalisation is beset by obstacles. Over the centuries, Syria has been at the centre for various highly developed cultures. But equally, the country has also experienced long periods of poverty and isolation. Today, peace and security remain a distant dream for the people of Syria. Syria sponsors anti-Israeli terrorist organisations like Hezbollah and is thus branded a rogue state by the US. But most Syrians remain adamant that groups like Hezbollah are legitimate freedom fighters in a battle for their homeland. Many Syrians feel that they have been unfairly labelled by the US and worry that they will become the next target in the war against terrorism.
We regret that the American administration committed that mistake. But what is more important to us, that Syrian record vis-à-vis the majority of the countries of the world is not similar to what the Americans are saying. We know for sure from American sources and official ones that this comes as a result of struggle within the State Department, and this list is for the State Department, between those who are committed totally to Israel, regardless of what Israel does or says.
On the streets, The Syrians closely follow the war against terrorism, but they believe that the real terrorists are to be found in Israel.
It is not Syria. It is not the Palestinians. Personally, I believe that the Jews are terrorists and racist. It is the Jews, the Israelis, not the Arabs or the organisations here. There is nobody here supporting terror. Our organisations are fighting for liberation, and they don't attack Israel from Syria. They belong to a people fighting for their land and their state.
When it comes to the Americans, I believe that what is happening to them is a result of their own actions. Syria is still gripped by poverty and underdevelopment, but the cotton crop is very good this year, and the harvest is going according to plan. And this provides for a substantial part of foreign earnings. Heavily loaded trucks are filling the roads from northern Syria, taking the cotton from the fields to the processing plants in Tishrin. Here, the cotton is prepared for export. And Syria has no problems finding buyers for their cotton. The Syrian market consumes about 33%, the rest is exported.
Is it difficult to sell the cotton abroad?
No, not at all. Syrian cotton is in high demand, especially in Western Europe. The port in Latakia, on Syria's Mediterranean coast, is the biggest in the country. It is the departure point for the cotton leaving for Europe and the rest of the world. But although cotton is one of Syria's most successful exports, the income is far from solving the country's enormous economic and social problems. Syria is lagging far behind the development of her neighbouring countries. The Nobleman's Palace in the centre of Damascus. It is known as the best restaurant in Syria, with food and surroundings far more luxurious than can be found in the rest of this poverty-stricken country.
All the people here, they like it, you know, and they feel happy. They don't believe you can find in Syria like that, you know. We may copy like Versailles, you know, everything you see from outside, we bring it.
The copies of antique paintings and statues are mixed with pictures and sculptures of former President Assad. It's not surprising that only the very wealthy Syrians dine here. Dinner for two costs around 3,000 Syrian pounds, £40. Not too much for Westerners, but to the Syrians it's almost 2/3 of a normal monthly salary. There are a few very rich people in Syria, and these few are seriously wealthy. Decades of economic stagnation have almost eradicated the middle class, and the vast majority of Syria's 16 million inhabitants are barely able to make ends meet. Salaries are low, even if you find a job. Unemployment is rampant, especially amongst the young, and every year an additional 200,000 young people join the workforce, desperate to find a job. October's book fair in Damascus highlights the situation. Young people desperately search for knowledge from early morning till late at night, all clamouring for information. The stall with computer literature is most popular. It is seen as the best way to succeed in the competitive labour market. Computers have become indispensable in business. There is hardly any job here or in any other Arab country where they don't use computers. If you specialise in them, you get a higher paid position. Syria is totally dependent on the export of agricultural products and raw materials. This is one of the Sabah weaving mills in Aleppo, northern Syria. The Syrians are trying to turn their raw cotton into finished products themselves before shipping them out. This is far more profitable, creating many new industries and providing many more jobs.
We are making here home textile business We are doing towels and blanket and bedspread and tablecloths. And 60% of our product is cotton product, as you see. It's because, you know, the cotton in Syria, it's good quality and we have a good quantities. We are exporting around 70% from the product of the towel or the cotton business. We are selling to Germany, to the European country, to America.
Is it good business?
Of course, it's a good business, yes.
But factories like this are scarce and unemployment runs high. Salaries remain low and living conditions are poor. The whole country needs investment, but it's hard to see from where it will come. That is why the government has initiated a serious overhaul of the banking and finance sector. The banking system is outdated, a bureaucratic nightmare of rules and regulations. Development has been blocked and investors are scared off by decades of state-planned economy.
This is because of a lack of a clear direction of the economy and a lack of an economic reform program. And so the private sector does not have enough confidence to invest at the level it can invest. You know, investors don't just respond to tax incentives and so forth. They need an overall environment to convince them to invest, whether domestic investors or foreign investors. And that overall climate has not been provided over the past 10 years. And what we are looking for is a clear assurances that the private sector will play a major role in the Syrian economy, removal of all obstacles to production, export, importation, and so forth, because we still have a high protective regime.
Everything remains tainted by the past. The state remains crippled from its long period of dictatorship and Soviet ties.
As you know that in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, all the Syrians were directed to study in the ex-socialist countries. So those who has been graduated from the socialist countries are now in the administration, and they have never heard about private banks and market economy, etc. Therefore, for them it is rather difficult to implement these decrees at the necessary speed.
To do business in Syria, you need to have the right people on your side. Corruption has become a huge problem. It infects all walks of life, but especially state officials. The president of the Chamber of Commerce tries to explain.
Our corruption is a special one. The purchasing power of the Syrian currency has gone down tremendously. But the salaries and the wages have not gone up accordingly or to the same extent. As a result, whatever there is corruption, it's not only the result of greed, but rather of necessity. And I think that Syria is now studying very carefully how best to dig this problem. I think that recognizing the problem is half the way to being able to solve it. And I think that the Syrian government is very serious about this point, because it does really create a main hurdle for a smooth, efficient jump from one position to what we want to go to.
Bashar al Assad initiated a tough campaign against corruption. Some officials were even arrested and imprisoned. But the campaign has now slowed right down. The problem of corruption may be as difficult to solve as the conflict with Israel since the occupation of the Golan Heights. Since the war in 1967, the Israeli-Syrian border has been closed, keeping many families split up for more than 30 years. Loudspeakers and binoculars are all that can now connect such families together. Who are you talking to?
My grandfather, my uncles and my aunts.
Where did you last meet them? Did you ever meet them?
No, we have never met them, but we spoke about a year ago, here on the border.
This is where the line of armistice runs along the Golan Heights. Israel conquered all of Golan during the war in 1967. Some of the local inhabitants ran away, others stayed and came to live under Israeli occupation, and so families became separated. Every Friday, some of the refugees will gather for this absurd family reunion, which is the only way they can contact each other. Most of them have never been to the other side of the border, being children of the original refugees, but they all hope to be reunited. God willing, sure.
There can be peace. If they give us back the land, there will be peace.
Syria was given 2/3 of the Golan back in 1974. The capital, Quneitra, was deserted and destroyed, and it remains so today. The people who lived in the Golans originally now reside in camps all over Syria. Their city will not be reconstructed until the day the Syrians get back all of the Golan.
To show the world that the Israelis respect nothing. They try to destroy everything.
Israel and Syria border each other here on the Golan Heights. The liberated Quneitra is surrounded by Israeli territory. The road to Damascus is the only route out. Israel maintains listening posts in the outskirts of Quneitra. These positions, like the one at Mount Hermon to the west, make up Israel's military eyes and ears. They are able to closely monitor any Syrian movements and any communication for many miles around. And yet, this is in fact the most peaceful Israeli borderline, despite the desperate situation. Indeed, there's not been any serious trouble here for years. It is peaceful enough for tourists to come and visit the city. A German tour group is visiting this ruined church. Like most countries in the region, Syria still has a small Christian minority. Syrians must obtain a special permit in order to travel to Quneitra, but this does not put people off. The city can get swamped, especially on Fridays, the Muslim holy day, with many travelling the 40 miles from Damascus. Some have special reasons to visit the former Golan capital. Nawal fled in 1967. Today she is revisiting the Golans with her children and grandchildren. She tells us the reason for her return.
To see our villages and take in the smell from them, we are looking at Tel Ali. It belongs to us, and always will. It doesn't matter how long a time it will take.
All of the negotiations between Israel and Syria about an Israeli withdrawal from the Golan have faltered. We asked Nawal whether she has any faith left in a return to her land.
With God's will and the leadership of Bashar, we will return. With the will of God, we will return. The children here will also dream of getting it back. If they called for war right now, I would send them all off, and I would lead them. I would carry water for them.
The border area is filled with UN observers. Syria claims that it wants a peaceful solution to the conflict. There has been no armed incursion against Israel from Syrian territory for many years now, but the relationship with Israel remains tense because of Syrian support for extremist Palestinian organizations. Much of the Lebanon is unofficially controlled by Syria. This includes several expensive military bases in the Bekaa Valley. Syria directly supports the Palestinian cause and spends a large chunk of the country's resources on the military. The Syrian Minister of Planning admits his country's spending on the defence costs his country dear, but remains defiant.
We have to have a minimum of mobilization to maintain a minimum of military force. So we spend money on that. We spend 43% of our budget on the military, on defense purposes. And this affects our productivity. We are in favor of peace, but we do not want to buy our prosperity with denial of our rights or denial of justice for the Palestinian people. We believe that we should continue to sacrifice, to pay the price until we get back our land, until the Palestinian people is organized in its inalienable rights, national rights, to go back home or to receive compensation, until the Palestinian state is born, is organized with Jerusalem as capital.
The stern image of former President Assad remains on the streets. But the dictatorship is slightly more tolerant now under his son, Bashar. Many dissidents jailed during Assad's time have since been released. The new president has even allowed criticism of the former regime and its endemic corruption. However, there are signs that political persecution is gradually making a return, as critics of Bashar's new government start to fill the jails. We talked to Mr. Nawasi from the Syrian Human Rights Organization, a lawyer and former political prisoner. They are starting to arrest people at random, bringing back memories of the regime which was normal under Bashar al Assad. Where you were arrested just for expressing an opinion. When Bashar took over power, the situation improved substantially for those supporting human rights, but the powers resisting change is strong and maybe stronger than the reformists in Syria. President Assad is now resting in peace in his magnificent shrine up in the mountains northwest of Damascus. Many had hoped that with his death, the harsh dictatorship would also disappear. But recent policy changes are making reformists wonder how different Bashar really is from his father. If you ask who is in power today, cynics will say it is Hafez Assad exercising his power from the grave. Syria does have a parliament, but it just rubber stamps policy for those in power. Bashar has not been courageous enough to remove those who were powerful under his father, and it is claimed that the old guard have slowly reasserted their authority, clinging to their privileged positions. Or is the reformist president just trying to make sure he keeps key figures on board?
The future is for reform, and the president knows that. To make substantial changes, you have to be very cautious, and you have to take in consideration what you have. So he's not going like to threaten the interest of the old guards just like this. I think he's doing it gradually because he doesn't want to destroy the stability of Syria.
But it is the current war on terror that is seen as the greatest threat to stability in Syria. President Bashar refuses to support the American campaign in Afghanistan and claims there are only freedom fighters operating in Syria. The Syrian government is gambling that their position in the Middle East is too strong for any direct US military action.
I don't think that the American administration, regardless of any mistake which is done here and there, I don't think they will come to something which is totally unreasonable. I don't think they can run so much against their basic interests in the region.